Happy Saturday morning. It's almost 6 a.m. I have another big day today. When I got home last night about 8:30 p.m., 8:15, and I saw a video clip of an interview between Ben Stiller and Scott Galloway, and Scott Galloway laying out a lot of the stats that he talks about regarding young men uh, and the things that they're experiencing and dealing with in 2025 in the United States. I think Scott leaves a lot out of his analysis. If you want to see that, I made a video about this last night. That's where my friend Cricket left this comment. And I think Scott Galloway leaves a lot of things out of his analysis. He kind of paints this picture of young men finding themselves in these circumstances through no fault of their own at all. None of us gets to pick our genetics. That's something that we are powerless over. But I think a huge cause of, and there are many, but I think currently in 2025, one of the main causes for the things that Scott Galloway talks about in young men is algorithms and social media platforms, videos and content that they are fed online, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or wherever. They're fed Jordan Peterson and Nick Fuentes and Andrew Tate and everybody and everything in Joe Rogan's bro sphere. And I talked about this a few days ago, last weekend on the Focus Group podcast with Sarah Longwell on the Bulwark. She was talking about a lot of these things, and they did a focus group with young women, young progressive women who were talking about, and a lot of them were talking about young men, and they want nothing to do with them because of a lot of this stuff. And a lot of the thing, one of the points that I made in the video that I made last night was just the rampant misogyny that I still see to this day in the legal community. And I spoke a little bit about some of the experiences of my friends who are women and who are attorneys, and just the endless stories that I hear from so many of them, even now, even today in 2025. And another factor that I think that Scott Galloway leaves out when he talks about young men is race. I spend a lot of time online and online communities. I read a lot. I have read a lot of articles about this kind of stuff, and it's young white men. I think Scott leaves that out. I'm not seeing anywhere online an absolute epidemic of young black men getting red pilled. There are some, but not nearly to the extent that it's young white men. And young Hispanic men, culturally, I think are tend to be, obviously none of these groups are monolithic, but young Hispanic men tend to be raised in cultures of machismo and misogyny. Culturally, that's just part of how they come up. But it's like, who are mass shooters in this country? They're young white men. And before any of the MAGA chuds come into my comments, I was reminded of Charlie Kirk's last words before he was shot and killed by a young white man. Somebody asked him at his outdoor event, "Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years?" And Charlie Kirk said, "Counting or not counting gang violence." Charlie Kirk said many, many, many incredibly racist things. And counting or not counting gang violence, he meant black people. He meant young black men. Mass shooters in this country are young white men. Serial killers in this country are almost always white men. I mean, I hear the joke, quote unquote joke, all the time from women online. It's like, we're the only people on the planet who have to date and marry our number one predator. They might kill us. They might kill us. You know, And I mean, you think about like just statistics on rape. Men, date rape, campus rapes, fraternities. Young men don't get roofied at parties. And, it's like I have a friend of mine whose daughter just started college and she joined a fraternity. And their fraternity based, or she joined a sorority. Their sorority basically holds safety classes for young women on how to safely go to frat parties to try to make sure that they don't get raped at frat parties. It's so prevalent, they have classes. And the young women at some of these sororities, it's like they set up buddy systems. They go to these parties in pairs or in small groups to keep an eye on each other to try to make sure that none of them get raped or drugged and raped at frat parties and campus parties. Young men don't have to deal with any of that shit. Domestic violence. Physical abusers are almost always men. Not exclusively, but almost always. 40% of cops. 40% of cops beat their wives or their domestic partners. Stalkers. Jeffrey Epstein. Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz, the Congress had actual evidence that he paid a homeless teenager $400 for sex. She was saving for braces. Show me the female equivalent of Jeffrey Epstein, apart from Ghislaine Maxwell, because they were working together. Show me a powerful billionaire woman who, for 25 years, sexually abused 13, 14, 15-year-old boys, and everybody knew about it and looked the other way. There is no equivalent. And it's like in red states all across this country, you have white men in state legislatures who are fighting to maintain the legality of child marriage. And it's like, I think for me, it's like, from what I observe online, is that young men I'll just say white men who support Donald Trump, when they're not crashing Grindr in Milwaukee, I think that those guys secretly envy Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein because they all want to marry teenagers. They all think that they should have unfettered access to whatever woman they want to have access to. And when they're denied that, then they get angry. When they ask a woman out and they get rejected, they get angry. Women get murdered by men they don't even know because a man asked them out and they said no. Has that ever happened to a man in the United States? In 2021, almost 5,000 women were murdered in the United States. 34% of those women were murdered by their husband, boyfriend, or partner. That doesn't happen to men on that scale, year after year after year after year after year. And now it's like, going back centuries. Religions. I don't think you can really narrow it down to just one. In the United States, all over the world, preach and preach and preach the subjugation of women, control over young women. Now we've got all this trad wife shit making a comeback in the United States. And it's like, I appreciate some of the stuff that Scott Galloway has to say. I think he points out real problems in the United States, but I think his analysis is about 35% complete because I've never heard him talk about this other shit. I've never heard him say, do the follow-up of saying, and also these young men who I'm talking about frequently rape and or murder young women and beat young women and threaten young women and stalk young women and get violent when they're rejected by young women. He doesn't include all of that shit that's real and matters.